Hi, I'm Lise Melhorn-Boe, and I'm in the Window Gallery in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. This is a retrospective exhibition called Connection, 40 Years of Artist Books, curated by Rebecca Korn.
Hello everyone, my name is Rebecca Korn and I was kindly asked by Lise Melhorn-Boe to act as curator for her very special 40th retrospective exhibition called Connection. The themes of her works range from ideas of gender and its societal stereotypes, the effects of the polluted environment of which we all share, the human body, family, and most recently, her sewing works. A common thread that I found in each of these themes was the integral element of connection. Connection is something that each of us can relate to in our own ways, in our own lives, and it is something that we all experience when viewing a work of art. The viewer-work relationship is a unique connection, a connection between not only work of art and viewer, but also artist and viewer. When contemplating the works of Lise Melhorn-Boe, the viewer is often asked to participate, to turn the pages of her works, to read, and to contemplate. When I started to work on this exhibition, I started to move through her works, and one thing that I immediately noticed was that despite the decade in which the work was made, there was a common thread of connection to the environment through the production materials she used. Her works are carefully crafted from recycled materials, which is ultimately a testament to her connection to the environment and, conversely, the lack of such that many of us have. This aspect of connection, ever expanding as it was as I moved through the decades of her work, remains despite varying in subject matter. For this reason, I like to think of connection, the title of the exhibition, as an umbrella theme that encompasses each of these thematic explorations of subject matter throughout her years of producing art.
I made my first book in 1979. I don't have it in this exhibition, but this one, which is called Transformation Book Number 7, is one of the earliest books. They were felted, and it's just, there's no text. It's just a transformation of colors going from white to kind of a purpley color. It's not too exciting. Oh, it's rather pretty, but that is how I started. And then I eventually ended up at Wayne State University in Detroit, where I actually learned how to make real books. These are a couple of funny ones that I did this on my 25th birthday in Detroit, and it's called From Noranda to Detroit, the First 25 Years. And I took photos, family photos, and I wrote a story around it. This was quite one of my professors at the University of Guelph, when I was doing my undergraduate work, talked about taking chances in your work, and this was something that I didn't have the story planned at all. I just had the paper and the rubber stamps and photos, and I started stamping. So it tells the story of my life with these photos. There were two themes: look at those legs, and is this art? And I enjoyed doing it, and it's quite fun. Bizarrely, the very next day, I got a birthday present from my youngest sister, and she had written a radio play about my life. And it was a day late, which is maybe just as well, because it might have influenced this one. So I eventually made her book into From Noranda to Detroit, Wheezy's version. And her version is quite funny. She's a good writer, and she plays a greater role in her version than she did in my version. There's a funny part about when she's born. In the summer of 1961, Lisa's world fell apart again. Yet another sister was born. On the verge of a nervous breakdown, Lisa set about perfecting the plan. This incredibly sweet, jolly child was not to be on center stage. Lisa approached her parents and offered to carry the infant Wheezy everywhere. Mr. and Mrs. M were delighted by this act of sisterly love. So for the next 14 years, Lisa carried cute little Wheezy everywhere. As Lisa grew, it became evident that one hip was lower than the other, but this didn't stop her. The plan must not fail. Sure enough, when it came time for Wheezy to start high school, she had to walk by herself. What a tragedy! Wheezy could not walk. Her leg muscles were withered and underdeveloped. To this day, Lisa has lopsided hips, but it was worth it. The hips part is true, but I didn't carry her for 14 years. But anyway, that gives you an idea of what that book is like. One thing that I learned at Wayne State was how to set lead type and print on a letterpress press, and how to bind a traditional book. So this is one of the first ones that I made. I was also studying paper making. They had a paper making class. And this is called Portrait of the Artist Family. And I made paper from curtains that we had in our home when I was a child. And then I asked each member of my family to give me some clothes. And I made them each set into paper. So this is my dad's page, and I have listed his name, where he was born, his birth date, and then what clothes were in the paper, which is 2 Biella plaid shirts and 1 Stanfield's undershirt. And then this one is my mother, and hers is very delicate because it's quite crazy. And that one's mine, and my next sister, and, oh no, I'm sorry, that's her husband, because he's a little older. I put them in chronological age. And my 2 sisters. It's hard, it's delicate paper. So I also did a large edition, 190 of this book, which was called Light and Flaky Portrait of the Artist's Mother. And I have some of the pages up here on the wall. And she wrote the text in letters, in dribs and drabs, and then I edited it and put it together. And I asked her for specific recipes, and I also used photos of her. This is these are 2 of my favorite photos of her. She's in the Air Force here, making paper dolls, and here she is after the Air Force. She was in, this is during World War II, she was able to go to university, and so she's at Acadia, and she didn't like her roommate, so she ended up living in the laundry room, so that's the ironing board coming down over her bed, which she used as a desk. This is another letterpress printed book, very delicate. It's called A Lady Always Has Beautiful Shoes and a Pretty Hanky, and I made the pages look like hankies This was one of the first books that I did where I wrote a questionnaire and sent it out to women that I knew, asking about various topics, one of which was being a lady, and so each paragraph is actually a little story from a different woman. And their names are at the back here. This was part of a series. There was one called Hairy Legs, and one which was actually life-sized leg-shaped paper with hair in it, and High Heels, which was a cast paper shoe foot with the pages were insoles in the shoe. And one was called Breasts, and it had text rubber stamped on the breasts. And so that was a kind of whole series where I was looking at women's body image. And then I began I did quite a few books. This is just one sample where I was using images from fashion magazines, which I find quite weird. And so I actually did the book in 1989, and I printed it in black and white. It was an edition of 150, and I only printed 50 probably, or 100, probably a financial thing. So years later, in 2010, I realized I had sold all 100, and I thought, well, there's no point printing them in black and white now when I can do them in color, and the originals were in color. So I have the black and white version and the color. So this is called a shuffle book, and as you can see, there are images and text on both sides of 52 cards. And you can make up your own story. So I've made up one here that says, begin a romance with infidelity. The hardest thing she has to do is tell him she has herpes. It's hard for him to resist. They are talking about sexual dead spots. Some women know how to get everything they want. So it's a kind of playing game type of book. I know I once gave a copy to a friend, and she had a party and they had a great time. So we're in the 1990s now, and I'm surrounded by a piece called Ghost Costumes. This started with a production of Fiddler on the Roof, in which there is a ghost scene, and my ex-husband was the musical director. My son was one of the children in the production, and they had ghost costumes for the production, which were kind of just like ponchos made out of sheer nylon curtain material. And I asked the members of the cast, if I could have their costumes when they were done. And I actually had a completely different idea, which didn't work. But then people began to meet me on the street. North Bay is not that big, and so they would recognize me and say, "What have you made art from our ghost costumes yet?" So I felt I had to come up with something, and somehow the idea came to me that I would make reproductions of my mother's clothes out of them. She had died recently. I can't remember exactly. I'm just going to check on the date. 96, 97. Okay, so she died in 1990, and then my dad had died, I think, in 1996. So these are costumes, but they're ghosts of things that she actually wore. So I reproduced. I looked at photos, and I reproduced garments that she had worn. This something she had when she was 6, and a teenage dress, and her Air Force uniform, and her wedding dress, and the suit she was wearing holding me when I'm about 2, and then something from the 70s, and a coat from the 80s maybe, yeah, and then a 2-piece dress. And the text is hers. Some of it came from the earlier ones from an interview that my ex-husband had done with her, and then some from her journals. She left 63 volumes of journals. She intended to write a novel, but she was waiting for my father to die because it would be about him, and she didn't want to hurt his feelings. Unfortunately, she got stomach cancer and died at the age of 64, so she never got to do it. And a lot of the text is kind of sad or poignant. This one, for instance, in April 27th, 1957, now I would have been 2 years old at this time, a triolet. No longer have I time to think, although I'm often on the brink of thought, but always must I halt. No longer have I time to think a thought, a disenchanting fault, a vegetable, through life I slink. No longer have I time to think, although I'm often on the brink. I'm sure many young mothers could identify with that. And there was another poem I wanted to read, which was later on. Oh, yes. Here is how I felt at 11:30 a.m., May 3rd, 1983. I am surrounded by army ants who nibble at my time and disturb the mold of my life. It will interject. At this point, she didn't have children at home, but my father had moved his office into the house, and his secretary, who talked a lot, and people would be coming and going, and it was quite disturbing. Each night, I lie in the dark and plan paintings, write poems, and draft stories. In the morning, they begin. Their chewing proboscises take the form of telephone calls, lost objects, loud voices, disturbing thoughts, incompetencies. I empty the garbage, prepare the noon meal, wash a few clothes, gnash my teeth. The poem is lost. The painting never reaches canvas or paper. The outline vanishes. Only left is a tiny pile of dried thoughts which crumble and blow away. My heart contracts. My muscles tighten. I choke on my own bitterness. Maybe tomorrow will be better, but they will be back, the army ants, to nibble and chomp. In 10 days, I will be 59 and will fade away, and no one will ever know what excitement and joy might have lain in those tiny piles of nothing dust. That's very sad. It makes me almost makes me cry. And then the end is also, I'll read the very last one. This is August 1990, and in September she discovered that she had stomach cancer. Sunday, le 26 August 1990, sometimes there's English and French mixed up. Picture taking, trying to get one of me with Peter and Elizabeth. Those are two of her grandchildren. Does Elizabeth know who I am? The things I can offer my grandchildren, like laughter, music, whimsy, fun, and love, take time. But little chance, they may never know me until I'm dead. I guess I'm responsible. I waited too long to get married. But I wouldn't have done it differently. The life I chose was best for me. Now, counterpointing these wistful thoughts and words of hers, I made ghost costumes. Kurt. And these are clothes that my father wore. They're all work clothes. The first one is actually here in this photo. He's up, this is when he's an apprentice in Germany, and so he's up on an electrical line and wearing his lineman's uniform or equipment. And all of these, he was an electrician, he was a contractor. He did large-scale things, not people's houses, but he did, for years, he worked on contract with Quebec Hydro, so he was doing transformers, substations, and then he did work for Noranda Mines and Tembec in Temiskaming, the paper mill, large industrial installations. He actually wired the deepest mine shaft in the world, which is now the Neutrino Lab. I think he would have been pleased with that. This last picture is him at 82 standing on top of a transformer in northwestern Ontario that he had installed many decades before, and they were reopening some mine, and they brought him in because he knew how the equipment worked and nobody else did or something. Anyway, he was quite pleased because he was retired by that time. So anyway, there's no text on his. It's just these images, which he had. He always had professional photographers come in and document his work just like an artist, which I think is really cool. And so these very impressive images are showing what he actually accomplished, whereas my mother, with the filmy kind of not quite so substantial clothes, has all these things that she wanted to do and didn't. And that's not unusual in a marriage of that era. On a funnier look, we could turn around here. This is, I began to be interested in fairy tales, and this is a book that I wrote in the guise of a fairy tale. It is a young man looking for a wife. And when it's called Girls I Have Known, after my father died, we found in his desk drawer a very small brown envelope with about 40 or 50 photographs of women, and he had written Girls I Have Known on the envelope. So I immediately snatched those and told my sisters they couldn't have them. And I I used them in this book, some of them anyway, and I went to the library to find a book on 20th century fashion because I was trying to sort of date the letters, the pictures. And I actually got so interested in the clothes that they took over. So we have costumes, or dresses from the 20s, the 1930s, which were very cool. The 40s were, because of the war, the skirts got shorter, they weren't using as much fabric, and they're kind of more uniform looking. And here's a pair of pants. And then we get into the 50s when Dior brought in his new look, which involved lots of fabric and big full skirts because the war was over and it was a kind of a celebration. And the last picture is actually my mother's wedding dress with the two of them on it. So I will read the text because it's quite funny. Once upon a time, there was a young man named Kurt who left his home and traveled to a faraway country to seek his fortune. He was a clever young man and hardworking too, so he soon prospered. Hey, you make it sound so easy. What about the cold? What about those damn mosquitoes? He thought to himself, it's time I started looking for a wife. Boarding house life wasn't all it was cracked up to be. There was lots of food, but some of it was pig swill. As he was a good-looking young man, now you're talking, as well as prosperous, there was no shortage of young women lining up for the job. This is no lie. All I had to say was, je suis enchantée de faire votre connaissance, and a girl would give me a picture of herself. A kiss on the hand, and she would be giving me her address and asking me to marry her. He thought about various attributes he could look for in a wife. The first quality was easy. He knew she had to be a very good cook because he liked to eat. Kurt was already getting a little bit stout. Stout? Manly is how I'd put it. He had already gone out with several beautiful women and found that they were more interested in themselves than they were in him. But I like beautiful feet, so I decided to leave them on the list. I figured time would wrinkle a beautiful face, but I could go on enjoying a beautiful foot for years. He was looking forward to having children, and being so clever myself, I didn't want to be bored by stupid children, so I decided to look for a clever wife. Once he knew what he was looking for, the young man began his quest. So this is the fairy tale thing, the three things that he's looking for. He found it difficult to ignore their faces, but he contrived ways to check out their feet. I planned picnics on hot days and trips to the beach. It was difficult to get women to ask him home to dinner. They wanted to be taken out to fancy restaurants. Several girls he had to reject most reluctantly because they were definitely not intelligent. Some of them did have other charms. It took him a long time, but he finally met a young woman, much younger than he was because this quest had taken many years, who had a master's degree and loved to cook. She was a smart cookie, but what about her feet? It took a lot of planning, but I persuaded her to visit the job I was doing in July in the Gaspé, hoping she'd wear sandals, at least when we went down to the beach. Much to my delight, she had lovely feet. And did they live happily ever after? Well, they did the best they could, and they had 3 clever daughters. All of them are good cooks, and all 3 have lovely feet. That first one should have become a lawyer or a doctor like I wanted her to, instead of a poor struggling book artist who doesn't have all her facts straight. And what kind of a happy ending is they did the best they could? After all, I accomplished everything I wanted to in my life. You can't get much better than that. He did actually tell me that on his 86th birthday, and then he died before his 87th. So this is really one of my favorite books. I just love this. Partly it's just the clothes are so cool. And I did. Eating was very important in the family, so I did a couple of books. The boy that liked to eat is in the next section, you'll see, but this one is called The Family That Liked to Eat. And it is us in our dining room, in our front porch, where we sometimes ate in the summer. Here we are in the, don't we actually seem to be eating too much in this picture, in the front of the fireplace, and here we are in the kitchen. And Oh, there's a funny picture of my mother having a little kissy fit with. She had a terrible time with toasters, and they were always breaking or like dying and burning toast. So here she was pretending to demolish one. And there's another. I'll just bring this over here. This one is called Once Upon a House, and it is focusing more on the architecture of the house that I grew up in, and it's about how the baby Lisa thought it was her house. There was this very cool staircase that had actually another section, and we swung from the banisters, and we also swung on the hot water pipe down. If it wasn't hot, we could do gymnastics on it. And this was a great time. We had an addition put on the house, and we had this big scaffolding. So every evening, as soon as the workers went home, we were climbing up that. And this is the same room that I got out of that extension onto the house with my doll collection. Rebecca picked for the theme connection for this exhibition, and not all my books are about my family, but she really, those are the ones that really interested her, and the family connections, and then later the connection to the environment. And so that's why there's especially in this decade, a real focus on the family. This is an interesting, I wonder if I can get one of these off. It's a book called The Trihexaflexagon. And this is a drawing that I did, and my sister Margaret, who's next in line, and then Marie-Louise, the third one. And it's called a trihexaflexagon because with one piece of paper folded, you get image number 1, image number 2, and image number 3. It's very cool. You can see in my picture of my parents, my mother looks very worried. She's even got wrinkles on her forehead. My father has his back to her. He's typing away. He wrote a lot of letters. He was hard of hearing, but I didn't even notice that I didn't give him ears. It was my husband who pointed it out to me later. And then in Margaret's picture, he's still not quite focused on her. He's reading the Globe and Mail report on business, but they are at least side by side, and she does have her hand on them. And then in the youngest sister's version, they're more a couple together. So it's interesting how you can grow up in the same family but have a different experience, which is what the point of this book. It's called Three Sisters. So that's the end of the 1990s. In the 2000s decade, I started exploring good little girls, and I had a number of exhibitions where I just had the good girl things, but that kind of somehow led me into fairy tales, and so I did a number of fairy tale books. Some of them were actually telling some of the fairy tale stories. So for example, this is Sleeping Beauty. And again, I was using the images and text from the fashion magazines. And because Sleeping Beauty is a well-known story, I wasn't actually trying to tell the whole story. I got introducing wannabe parents, loneliness. It's a problem in many couples' relationships. And then here's the pregnant mother, a dream come true, and here she is, birth of beauty. There she is, the baby. In that story, there's a section where they have a christening party and a whole lot of fairies come. So these are the fairies and their gifts. And I didn't find a spindle in the fashion magazines, so I elected to use stiletto heels as the thing that put Sleeping Beauty to sleep. Amazingly, there are a lot of comatose women in these magazines, so it was easy to find her asleep. And here's the prince coming and swinging in and saving her. It's a testosterone thing. Your prince has come and he's a small bag full of air. It's just amazing with the text that I could find that was appropriate. So I did Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Beauty and the Beast. 2 more. My mind's gone blank, but one was called Manyford, which is a less well-known story. I also then wrote a questionnaire and asked women about fairy tales, so I got some good stories. One of them led to this book called German Good Girls, all one word, and it references the fairy tale Mother Holle, which involved a well. This type of book is called a tunnel book. Generally, you hold the front cover in one hand and you pull the back cover and you look through the tunnel, but we made it. This is a collaboration that's I think maybe the only collaboration that I have done with another artist where we really both actively worked on the book. The other artist's name is Clarissa Lewis, and she wrote the text. Anyway, we decided we would do it this vertically so that it looked like a well. And I also wrote a couple of stories about my dad in the guise of a fairy tale. So this one is called The Boy Who Liked to Eat. And it starts off, once upon a time there was a poor shoemaker with 9 children. And here's a picture of my grandfather. I mean, it was very convenient that he actually was a poor shoemaker to make it for the story. So it's quite funny, and it's the story of his coming to Canada from Germany, but written as a quest for food, because so many fairy tales have a quest in them. So as you can see, it starts off dull, and at the end with all my mother's cakes and a Pflaumenkuchen and a Black Forest cherry cake and a pumpkin pie and a roast goose. The color is quite bright. He was a bad little boy. I'm trying to find, there's a very funny little story. Oh, here, little Kurt. This is Lösnitz, the village he came from. Little Kurt was always hungry, but he was not always honest. He and a classmate, Walter, looked very much alike. One day, Walter's godmother, the baker's wife, called out to little Kurt on his way home from school, "Walter, come, let me give you something for your birthday." Did little Kurt tell her that he was not Walter? No, he did not. He and brother Willy stuffed themselves with cake and sticky buns. There's also a story about him stealing pie from someone in a boarding house. These are stories that he had told, and then I put them together. There's another book here. It's not really related to fairy tales at all, but somehow I ended up doing family things, and so it ended up. This is another family story. This is called the Star Carousel because when you put the book in this formation, it looks like a star, and it's kind of like each page actually has 3 layers, and so it's kind of like a little stage set. And it's a funny little story about my parents. It's called Kindly Allow Me because at the very end, my dad is in the bathtub. He's been there a very long time. My mother's worried about him. Once upon a time, the mother got so worried because the father had been in the tub for so long that she hovered at the door, straining to hear a sound. She heard nothing. Was he asleep? Had he had a heart attack? She was a great worrier. Finally, she could contain herself no longer. She asked the father, "Are you all right? Do you need help?" The aggrieved reply came back through the door. "Kindly allow me to determine my own destiny." In the 2000s, I also, I developed breast cancer, and I got interested in, I guess what happened was I went to a naturopath who made a connection between my getting breast cancer and the fact that I'd lived in Rouyn-Noranda, Quebec, and in Coppercliff, Ontario. Both were places with smelters. And so I thought, well, it was interesting, and I thought if my body had been affected by our environment, other people must be too. So I think I spent 6 years exploring this topic. And so these are a couple. This one's called Body Map, and it is a photo of me. In the background are little factoids about the environment, things that might have affected me. And then on my body is information. Some of it is funny. Like 2005 began to get old lady wrinkles in my knees. And some of it is more serious. And so there are connections between what's going on in the environment and the breast cancer, for example. And this one is called No Safe Levels. This is a rock cut in Northern Ontario. I love the rock cuts, but as you can see, there's a figure emerging out of it here. So this is me with one breast and one star. And on the rock cut is graffiti, and what it is all the heavy metals, because I had a test. And so these are all the heavy metals that were in my body at the time. And the size of the text refers to the amount. So there was more lead and mercury, for example, than tungsten or tin. And then there's that quote at the bottom from David Suzuki. There is no separation. We are the environment. So whatever we do to the environment, we do to ourselves. Another one in the environmental series is called Homeless. I'll just read the text. In the fall of 2006, I came across a disturbing statistic. According to a study from the Environmental Health Coalition of Western Massachusetts, 57% of people with multiple chemical sensitivities have been homeless at one time or another. I thought, phew, I'm lucky that I have a safe home because I do have multiple chemical sensitivities. But by the fall of 2007, my own house was making me sick, and by that winter, I had been forced to find a new place to work and was sleeping in our unheated front porch with piles of quilts and a hot water bottle. I felt as if I were homeless. And so this is, I was living in North Bay at the time, First Avenue, and so this is my block, and each of the houses of my neighbors, and then I've just left mine blank, with the text. So here we are in the 2010s. So I continued working on that environmental series, and I've got a few pieces from that. These are some small things. Some of the pieces in this series were quite large. There was a big fabric pop-up book that opened up kind of like a dollhouse with 3 levels of rooms, and there was information about toxins in houses. It was called Home Sweet Home. And there was a really large tunnel book that looked like a baby's crib with stuff about toxins that damage babies. But anyway, this is a little one called Breast Cancer Journal. I didn't actually start off for this to be a piece of art. It actually was just a little journal that I was keeping during my breast cancer experience. There are no words. I decided not to explain the imagery. I just photocopied most of the pages in it, and so we hear that's some of the heavy metals, one of the heavy metals tests. That's kind of how I was feeling at one point. Here I am detoxing in a sauna, doing some sort of yoga or meditation or something, gardening. I think that's me and my nurturing my inner child. So it's just a little a journey of my breast cancer journey. But a lot of people were interested in it, so that's how I ended up making an edition. I photocopied about 5 of them. I made a really cool book called Garbage, which actually is about garbage, made of garbage, and is in a garbage can. And it was very popular, and I had so much more information about garbage that I made more garbage. This book, has covers that are the bottoms of clementine boxes that I collected on Christmas. And then the pages are sewn on ties, which is a kind of medieval technique. But the straps are various, like these are left over from a knapsack, and this is some broken headphone and some piece of garbage. And I found lots of mittens on the street in that spring after the snow had melted. I don't know how I ended up, this is from a train. I don't remember stealing it, but there it is. And this is, my son was the Lego champion of Canada, and this is his t-shirt, and he wore it, you can see he wore it to shreds. It's really falling apart, and he generously let me include it in this book. So the text is printed on cardstock and it's machine sewn onto the pages, and it is all about the garbage that we throw out and how it's affecting us. Plastic isn't truly recyclable in the way that glass, metals, and fibers are. Streams of mixed plastic can be turned into only one other product, plastic wood, garden pavers, or toothbrush handles, for example. When their useful life is over, these products cannot be recycled again. They have to be burned or buried. Either way, they add toxins to the environment. So here's another t-shirt, and just all sorts of stuff that I had left over in my studio, and more gloves, pretzel bag. So that is more garbage. And then this one wasn't, it was sort of part of the environmental series. It's called diffuse axonal injury. My son had a very bad car crash and had a catastrophic brain injury. And so this was one of my ways to attempt to visualize what had happened in his brain. And so the orange and pink threads are whole, but the green ones have all been split and shredded. This was I found this mold to make Jell-O for a Halloween party, and I realized that I could put paper pulp in it. Now, because these books were about the environment, I was really conscious of the materials that I was using, and I was trying to recycle or reuse leftovers. For example, Homeless was made out of some paper that I had left over from another project. And so it got me thinking about recycling, and I ended up doing a whole series of books called the Rebooks, and they were like this one. There were about 15 or 16 of them, and they all hung freely in a gallery. And they looked really beautiful, all of the letters together. So each book has, thinking about reduce, reuse, recycle, each book has only 3 words, and they all begin with R-E. So this book is called A Bitter Love Story. You can see the cover there. And the letters are all made out of t-shirt material. They were leftovers from an attempt on my part to make money by making upcycled t-shirts and selling them at craft fairs. And so I had all these bits left over. And so I sewed them into tubes, and kind of when you're making balloon animals, I would just pin and form the letters. It was actually quite fun. I really I love the fatness of these letters. So the 3 words in A Bitter Love Story are reject, retaliate, regret. And I not all of the stories, the books were love stories, but there were a few, and just by coincidence, A friend of mine sent me a poem that she had written about a t-shirt and a failed love story. And I will read the text. This book, Rebecca, is kind of the pivot point for the whole show, because when she saw that, she got the connection idea.
One work that concreted my conception of the exhibition as encompassing connections of various kinds is T-shirt, produced in 2017. A friend of the artist, Beth Cook, had gone through a heartbreaking breakup. This work recalls Cook's experience of the days and weeks that followed her breakup. The first connection I realized about this work was that of a collaborative nature. Cook wrote the poem, a testament to her experience of the breakup, and Melhorn-Boe created the work at hand, making it tangible. Collaboration in various ways plays a steady role in Melhorn-Boe's work. This collaborative nature, to me, can be boiled down to a fundamental creative and human connection. The idea of connection can also be realized through reading the poem that inspired this work. It's the one that's included on the actual work of art written by Cook, which testifies a connection between two humans, past lovers, and two spirits being connected despite the initial connection having been lost. Ultimately, this work, like many others produced by Melhorn-Boe, has made the connection tangible for viewers to experience, providing a third form of connection. This third form of connection is one that I've already spoken about, and it is the connection between artist, in this case two artists, writer and artist, and viewer. Finally, the t-shirt that is the base of the work is the real t-shirt that Cook references in her poem, so as viewers flip through the pages of this participatory work, they can feel connected to both artist and poet, those who made this work tangible.
This poem says, "This morning I wore your t-shirt. It's all that is tangible that I have of you. It's turquoise like the pool where we swam. My body is lost in it, but it comforts me. I am a child with a treasured blanket to protect me from the meanness of the world. I am a dog nursing discarded clothing which carries the scent of its long-lost master. Despite the fact that you are gone, I feel less alone when I wear it." And this is the actual t-shirt. I arrived from meditation group, and they tell me I look amazing. I have married your shirt with a pair of equally turquoise earrings. What can I say to the compliment but thank you? No one knows why I wear this stained, ill-fitting shirt, which seems to be my color. I'm deeply and sadly at home in it, alive with your presence, even though someone else has claimed my space in your heart. You do not know that I do not ever cry. We were still so new to each other. You had met only the best representative of myself. This your expression for best foot forward in a new relationship. Legs crossed, hands held high for chanting. I treasure my presence in this room filled with peaceful people. We sing and my tears rain down on your shirt. And the poem is by Beth Cook. This book here is another one that was in the rebooks. There were two little ones like this. It's called a flag book, where you have something, images or something flying off an accordion. And it's called Begin Again. Reorient, redesign, renovate. At the time I was beginning a new life after a 25-year marriage, and I was renovating a house, so it was appropriate. And then the last thing that I've done in this decade, and I'm just still working on this series, they're called the Sewing Poems, and it started with Lorna Crozier, and she asked me if I had ever read her book of it's called the Book of Marvels, a compendium of everyday things, and she has poems about ordinary objects. And one of them was button, one of them was scissors, one of them was needle, and one of them was zipper. And as a sewer, these were the ones that I gravitated to. And I started, I have made a book called Zipper and one called Needle. And anyway, this is button. And I made it to look like clothing, so that the cover looks like a jacket with this beautiful button that an elderly friend gave to me from her collection when she was divesting. The button's vocabulary is starkly solipsistic. It uses itself in its two essential actions, that is, button the button and unbutton the button. No waste, no extra syllable. And I'm just going to read my favorite part. They make you think of white gloves and garters and cigarette filters red as lipstick. Button your lip, the blonde says to him unambiguously as she slips out the door, the key on the nightstand by the bed. I also used her poem called Zipper, and I was showing it to somebody else, and she got so excited she wrote some zipper poems for me, and I've made them into a book as well. And her name is Terry Ann Carter. She lives in Victoria, and it's called Zipper a Suite. So she has 5 poems, and which one shall I read? Ooh, well, you know what? I'm going to start with this one because this was so cool. This is my reproduction of a painting by Sharon Thompson, who lived in Kingston for many years and now has moved to Calgary. And the painting is huge, and it's on my wall in my living room. And Terry Ann's poem says, in a house on Stephen Street, in a room colored cobalt blue with an abstract painting the size of a door hung sideways, I unzipped the zipper book, watched layers of textile unfold like a waterfall, the tiny teeth of zippers gnawing on the poetry bone. And so she's referring to Lorna Crocher's zipper poem, and this one is, see this black leather jacket with the big zippers. There were 2 silver zippers on the front of his leather jacket, the tease of those little pulls, the wink in that gorgeous metal. So I'm quite enjoying these sewing poems. It's really fun to experiment with structures and making the textiles work and augment the poetry. This one I found by going on the internet, and it is by Alice Moore Dunbar Nelson, who was an American poet who lived in the early 20th century, and it's called I Sit and Sew. And this is modeled on what was called a housewife, which was the sewing kit that the soldiers used in World War II and again in World War I and again in World War II. So it has pins and buttons and thread, and then her poem, which is quite poignant. I sit and sew. A useless task, it seems. My hands grow tired, my head weighed down with dreams. The panoply of war, the martial tread of men, grim-faced, stern-eyed, gazing beyond the ken of lesser souls, whose eyes have not seen death, nor learned to hold their lives but as a breath. But I must sit and sew. I sit and sew. My heart aches with desire, that pageant terrible, that fiercely pouring fire on wasted fields and writhing grotesque things once men. My soul in pity flings, appealing cries, yearning only to go there in that holocaust of hell, those fields of woe, but I must sit and sew. And then she goes on and ends up, God, must I sit and sew? So I've contrasted the delicate linens with imagery from World War I, and that was an interesting little project. So I'm still working on these. This is I think I probably have about 6 or 7, and eventually we'll have an exhibition just of this work. So I've been working for 40 years and I'm still going strong.
It's interesting to me that this exhibition is showing during the current global crisis. Although it is unfortunate that some may not be able to make it to the exhibition in person, the current state of the world may remind us that connections remain vital, whether it be between family, friends, oneself and the environment, one's own body. Staying connected can provide a sense of stability and hope for the future. Ultimately, some connections may come and go, resulting in memories. What Lise Melhorn-Boe does so well is make these memories of these connections tangible. Finally, I would like to thank Lise Melhorn-Boe once again for this wonderful opportunity, and all those who helped put the exhibition together. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It has been truly a wonderful experience working on this project, and although I cannot be there in person at the exhibition due to what's going on, I wish everyone the best and hope you enjoy.
There is a catalog to accompany this exhibition. It's called Connection, 40 Years of Artist Books. And there is an essay by Rebecca Korn that talks about a lot of the work. And then there's an interview with me which goes into some of the how and why I've made things. And these are here for sale.